I've been a Metroid fan for a long time. Prime, Zero Mission, and Fusion are still some of my all-time favorite games, but even the most diehard fans will tell you that the series has been in a weird place for a very long time. We've gotten spin-offs, we've gotten remakes, and we've gotten crap, but we haven't had anything to truly advance the story of Samus Aran, galactic bounty hunter and half jellyfish, half bird person, since 2002's Metroid Fusion. So needless to say, this year's Metroid Dread had a lot riding on it. And wow, this is gonna be by far the newest game I've ever reviewed, and I'm still 3 months late. But anyway, I'm here to give you my thoughts on Metroid Dread. This game actually starts with a recap of Fusion and some basic info to get everyone caught up on the series lore. Kind of a clunky way to start a game's story, but it's a series staple at this point, and Fusion was almost 2 decades ago, so this was probably a good idea. We find out that an X-parasite has been spotted on a remote planet called ZDR, that the first research team of deadly robots has been lost, and that Samus is sent in to find out what the hell is going on. And we've also got the long-awaited return of AI Adam in this game. There's that old catchphrase. You know, I like this guy when he's inside a computer and not inside a bad game. Samus descends into the bowels of the planet and is immediately confronted by, holy shit, a living Chozo. That's new, right? Like, this is our first time seeing a live Chozo, the aliens that adopted Samus and gave her her power armor, and the first one we ever meet in the main series of games immediately defeats Samus, drains her powers, and turns her armor blue for some reason. Guess he was just a big fan of the fusion suit color scheme. So right off the bat, we've got a good plot setup. Samus is lost and alone on a hostile and mysterious alien world, no surprise there, but unlike a lot of Metroid games, we've got an interesting villain firmly established right from the start, which I really like. Why didn't he kill her? What exactly does he want with Samus? We've got a clear goal, some mysteries to hopefully find the answers to. It's all basic, but it really works for me. And yeah, maybe the text boxes were a little retro, a little low budget, but I don't know. I'll happily take a few text boxes with some great art and atmospheric music over an annoyingly long, terribly written, terribly voice-acted cutscene to start off a game.
The nickname comes from the fact that the purpose of the signal is to draw attention.
Okay, yeah, I know this video's not about Other M, so I'll dial back the hate. And since we're past the opening setup of the game, I'm gonna put a general spoiler warning here. I'll have another spoiler warning later for major plot stuff, but in general, after this point, nothing except the very end of the game is gonna be off limits. So the first thing you'll probably notice as you start playing is that this game is gorgeous. The backgrounds look amazing, Samus animates so fluidly, and there is an astonishing level of detail in everything you can see. It runs at a smooth 60 FPS, which you can't see in my footage because my old-ass capture card can only do 30 FPS, so sorry about that. Now there's a lot going on that make the visuals work so well here. One is, of course, the Switch hardware. This is the first ever Metroid game to be developed for an HD console. The last console game in the series was Other M on the Wii, and don't get me wrong, visually that game looked pretty good for a Wii game, but this is just a whole different universe visually. Mercury Steam and Nintendo EPD are making amazing use of the Switch's hardware to deliver a game that is visually beautiful and completely easily readable, which I'd argue is even more important. See, it's one thing to have gorgeous graphics, but if I can't play your game with some kind of detective vision that ruins the aesthetic in order to make the game actually playable, well then the nice graphics aren't really doing that much for you, are they? Of course, this is simpler with a 2D perspective, but still, it's impressive how this game manages to look so visually appealing without ever sacrificing any readability. That Z-axis is beautiful to look at, and it gives this 2D game an amazing sense of 3D depth, but it manages to never interfere with gameplay. They even use the background to further tell the story, build atmosphere, and do some really effective foreshadowing. Even just in this first area, they make great use of lighting to create some variety in what would otherwise be very drab gray hallways. Later areas make great use of color, and there's some really awesome environmental storytelling later on that I love. This is the first time we've seen a Chozo ruin that isn't a ruin. This is a Chozo facility that is still mostly functional, and that includes scientific testing areas of all the typical Metroid types. Lava zone, water zone, plant zone, and even some regal palatial areas that are still being maintained in their full glory. It's a far cry from the scattered ruins of previous Metroid games, and it creates a different kind of mystery surrounding the Chozo. Why is this place still mostly intact? We only know of one guy who lives here so far. There's no way he's maintained all this alone, so what happened to everyone that should be here? And how recently, and why? I like this bit of intrigue that the world generates just by being different from the game environments we've seen before in the series. It makes you really want to explore to hopefully find answers to all these questions you're going to have about the world. Which is, of course, the bread and butter of any Metroid game, having a good world to explore. The core gameplay is the same as it's always been with Metroid: explore, find new powers, use those powers to access new areas, boss fight here and there, repeat. It's a tried and true formula for a reason. There's inherent satisfaction in feeling yourself grow stronger. Samus can only jump, slide, and shoot at the start, and to go from that to the whirling dervish of death you become in the endgame is always a great feeling. But to get there, you're gonna have to find your way around ZDR. Personally, I think the best Metroidvanias are the ones in which you know where to go without feeling like you've been told where to go. At the same time, I also like to feel lost while actually being guided down the right path without knowing it. These two things seem pretty similar, or actually, maybe they're contradictory, I'm not sure, but I know that Metroid Dread accomplishes both, and it deserves a lot of credit for that. Because personally, I don't like when a game constantly tells me where to go. Waypoints, quest markers, little dumb line telling you where to turn during every single moment of gameplay. Most of the time when I'm playing a game that has something like that, I just find myself wishing that the game had some other way to guide me. But at the same time, I can see why those features are usually implemented. Nobody wants to just be lost in a massive world with zero guidance where the only way forward is some inscrutable nonsense. Metroid Dread is really clever about how it deals with this. Sometimes it locks off the way you came from, forcing you to explore a smaller chunk of the world map to make sure you find the necessary item from that area. And once you get a new power, the game is good at hinting at where you should go next. They don't outright tell you, hey, it's time to go to the next area now, but they hint at it just hard enough that you feel like you thought of the idea yourself. For example, after you get the bombs in Dairon, there's a bunch of morph ball launchers you can suddenly take that launch you down a path that leads directly to the train to Burenia. It doesn't feel like, okay, I guess the game wants me to go over here now, let's just follow this arrow to the next part of the game. It feels like you're discovering something for yourself. Yeah, the path is basically linear, but the simple fact that you're finding a new area that you weren't explicitly told about, using a new power that you just got, and that leads you to a train to another new area you didn't know existed, makes this exciting and fun and not a dull trek down a series of hallways. And for the first time, I think, in a Metroid game, they give you the tools to investigate and figure out where to go next right there in the map. Instead of a giant pink blob that tells you zero helpful information, thanks for nothing, Super Metroid Meridia, Dread's map is super detailed and user-friendly. You can highlight almost anything on the map and it will show you every other instance of that thing that you've already visited. I didn't realize this on my first playthrough, and I kinda wish the game had told me, but hey, it is right there on the bottom of the screen every time you hit start, so I really don't have an excuse for not seeing it. This feature is incredibly helpful if you're stuck, and combined with the log of what items you've gotten recently and what hints the game has given you, you can really start to feel like a detective, piecing together clues, examining the map until that great aha moment where you find a door you couldn't open or a block type you couldn't break that you just got the item for, and boom, you've figured out for yourself how to make progress. Not only does this feel great, but it also allows for plenty of different playstyles and player experiences. If you just want to know where to go, you generally have the tools and information you need to find that out for yourself. Or if you just want to get lost and explore for a while, go ahead, there's nothing forcing you to use the map to find the next step on the critical path. Now, to be fair, sometimes the game does just tell you where to go next, like when Exposition the Bird says, okay, just go to the next spot, here it is. Yeah, you know, that stuff's a bit on the nose, and yeah, the big heat pipes early on are a bit of a cheat, but they're visually weaved into the world in a convincing enough way that it doesn't feel like I'm being led by the hand. And then again, sometimes being outright told where to go is exciting. It guides you invisibly most of the time, but when it's time to get the screw attack, Dread makes sure that you know there's something badass there. It teases a new major power-up, puts it just out of reach, and makes you take this long trek to defrost this area, and then gives you a route back to it through an area filled with enemies you can destroy now, and challenges you couldn't handle before. The whole time building anticipation for when you finally get your hands on the new item, and when you finally get it, In general though, this is one of the least backtracky Metroids I've ever played. There's a word that only exists in Metroid discourse, backtracky. That is a complaint that I know some people have had. Once you know how to play the game and how to interpret the signposting it's giving you, it is pretty linear. The path out of one critical area will generally lead you right to the next place you're supposed to be, or a teleporter that will take you right where you need to go. I can see why this would be a weakness of the game for some people, but I prefer this to almost every other Metroidvania I've ever played. As much as I love Zero Mission, I don't really get a whole lot of enjoyment out of jumping my way up and down the vertical sections in Brinstar over and over. Up the shaft, down the shaft, into Norfair, back up to Kraid, back down to Norfair again, back up to Torian. You have to go up and down these fucking things so many times, and what I described is the minimum. Sure, it's a holdover from the original game, but I don't know, backtracking over places I've been to a dozen times before is not an aspect of Metroid that I think is necessarily sacred, at least not in isolation. Backtracking can be made fun with new things to find in areas you've already been to. Zero Mission definitely does this, but the backtracking itself is not what makes Brinstar a good Metroid map. The power-ups and exploring new areas is what appeals to me about Metroid games, and I get it. Zero Mission and Fusion are pretty old and were on handheld hardware. They had to squeeze every last bit of interest and content they could out of what assets they had time to make, and could squeeze into those tiny cartridges. But Dread is so expansive and so varied that I think the design approach they took makes a lot of sense. Trekking back and forth across a map this huge would be a huge pain, so having a lot of interconnectivity is the perfect solution. And a sort of fast travel does get unlocked towards the end of the game. Once you've been pretty much everywhere, all the teleporters will become linked to every other one, so you can go from any teleporter to any other. This is pretty much only for the purposes of 100% item completion, or for people who need some extra power-ups at the end to help them beat the final boss. And personally, I probably wouldn't have bothered to get 100% items if this feature wasn't here, so this definitely gets a thumbs up from me. What this really comes down to is that I, as a player, want Metroid world design to accomplish a lot of seemingly contradictory things. I want to know where I'm going, but I don't want to be told where to go. I want to explore and get lost and wonder where things are, but I don't want to get too lost. And if I do need help, I want to be able to help myself. This is a lot to ask of a game, and yet Dread kinda nails it, and I think gamers who really want to get lost still have a lot to enjoy with Dread, and for gamers who prefer a more guided experience, Dread provides the tools for that. So at the risk of sounding like an IGN review of a mediocre AAA game, there really is something for everyone here. Now, I struggled a bit with where in the review to put this section about E.M.M.I.s. At first, it's easy to put them in the combat discussion since, well, they're enemies, and enemies are the things that you fight in the game. But that's not really what E.M.M.I.s are, and I'll explain what I mean here. There are 7 E.M.M.I.s in the game, though one is already busted when you find it for tutorial purposes, and the last one, well, it dies in a cutscene, so in practice there's only 5. Each E.M.M.I. will patrol its respective zone, marked clearly by special doors, and will chase you if it spots you. The first fully functional E.M.M.I. you encounter is built up super well. The room where it first chases you is designed so that you can get just enough of a look at it to see how it moves, and get the idea that it can move around using pathways you can't access, and hammer in the fact that it is going to relentlessly chase you and you cannot stop it on your own. They are completely immune to all of your standard weapons, and if they touch you, you are most likely dead in one shot. They can be countered, but we'll touch on that later. The only way to permanently put one down is to find the zone's central unit, which all look and behave eerily similar to Mother Brain, kill it, absorb its power, and use that temporary power boost to explode the E.M.M.I.'s brain. I like how this is done. It really sells the horror aspect of the E.M.M.I.s. Even when you're powered up enough to kill one, you still need to strategize with the environment to get the E.M.M.I. in a position where you can wear down its shielding with a beam that locks you in place while you use it. And even when their shield is down, you again have to watch them creep slowly towards you while you desperately pray that your beam finishes charging in time to kill it. It's a very effective set piece, only hampered by the fact that you have to do it in the exact same way for every E.M.M.I. in the game. The E.M.M.I.'s adapt and change as the game progresses, each one gaining new powers supposedly to suit its environment and making them all function slightly differently. You'll be able to absorb each E.M.M.I.s signature ability for yourself once you destroy it, and these are some of the most important power-ups in the whole game. It really makes finding the mini Mother Brain and defeating each E.M.M.I. feel like a genuinely big deal, since not only do you get a significant power-up, but you'll also completely transform a massive chunk of the map, since there isn't a killer robot patrolling there anymore. Now, E.M.M.I. zones are an interesting subcategory to talk about with Dread's world design. They're a super important feature, and yet they kind of function completely differently than the rest of the game. E.M.M.I. zones are expansive and labyrinthine and all more or less look the same. It's very easy to lose track of where you've already been, and on top of all that, there's a killer robot hunting you. That sense of not knowing exactly where you are makes that titular sense of dread all the more effective. This is what I meant when I said that E.M.M.I.s aren't really combat-related challenges, they're really world navigation challenges. They're hazards to be avoided while you learn to get in and out of the patrol zone as quickly as you can without being spotted, which makes E.M.M.I. zones feel like kind of an exploration boss fight. They're basically sections of the map that put a time component on your exploration, forcing you to traverse the area and figure out where to go as quickly as you can, which is a really neat concept. However, these areas are deceptively linear, like a coloring book maze for children. Yeah, there's a lot of dead ends and it looks really complex at a glance, but in reality, all the dead ends are pretty easy to get back out of, and the only way deeper into the maze is gonna take you forward. That's how E.M.M.I. zones are designed, but since you're trapped inside with a robot that wants to do unspeakable things to you, it doesn't feel like a little kiddie maze for babies. It feels like a desperate struggle to find your way out before an E.M.M.I. sticks a needle in your face. And since the map isn't actually all that complex and you get a free checkpoint before you enter the maze, you can get that feeling of being lost like a rat in a maze without ever getting too frustrated. Puzzle solving takes a backseat in these areas too, at least while the E.M.M.I. in that zone is still alive. It would be pretty unfair and pretty unfun to require the player to find unmarked exits and fight a bunch of other enemies with this amount of pressure on them the whole time. So finding your way around in E.M.M.I. zones is usually pretty simple. Once the E.M.M.I. is dead, these zones open up, spawn new enemies, and generally turn into areas just like the rest of the game, with collectibles and hidden paths to find and normal enemies to fight. Overall, they're used well, and I like them. Another important feature is the ability to melee counter E.M.M.I.s, and I think this was implemented in a really smart way. When you make any contact with an E.M.M.I., it'll start a short quicktime event where you have to hit X at exactly the right time, and Samus will stun the E.M.M.I. and get a chance to escape. Even though you've got 2 chances and a very obvious bright light telling you exactly when to hit the button, this QuickTime event is 100% absolutely unfair, and you will not hit it with any consistency. The timing is super tight and it changes every time the QTE starts. You're gonna feel like it almost never works, and honestly, that's fine. It's supposed to be unfair. You aren't supposed to get it every time. The game says that as soon as it introduces the mechanic. This is great because it provides some variance to E.M.M.I. encounters. Functionally, it might as well just pop up a slot machine for how random it is, but because it doesn't do that, and it requires an actual well-timed input from the player, when you do hit it, it feels great, it feels earned. If this was just a cutscene that randomly allowed the player to live 10% of the time, this mechanic would feel like shit. But since it's a reward you earned yourself that wasn't just handed to you out of charity, it feels pretty good. But that melee counter is not just for rolling the dice against E.M.M.I.s. Almost every enemy in the game can be melee countered. This is, I think, gonna be a polarizing feature. On the one hand, I'm not a huge fan of how the melee counter can tend to dominate normal combat. A new-ish feature is that the L button will lock you in place and let you precision aim with the left stick, which you might think means that Metroid Dread is going to focus more on being accurate with your beams and missiles, but that doesn't really end up being the case. This aiming feature is still super handy and feels great to use, but most enemies after a certain point take a tremendous amount of shots with missiles and a ludicrous amount of beam shots to kill, but will go down with a single melee counter. On the other hand, it opens up a lot of new possibilities for combat that previous games never had. The counters in this game against bosses feel a lot like busters in DMC 4 and 5 in the best possible way. At certain points, most bosses will do a flash to cue you to hit the melee counter, and hitting it with good timing will net you some health and missiles and lead to a visual spectacle where Samus will just lay into the boss in a pre-animated sequence. And the best thing about these is that they don't feel like sterile QuickTime events disconnected from the rest of combat like, say, reaction commands in Kingdom Hearts 2. Still love that game, but, only fair to point out its flaws. You still have full control over Samus's arm cannon the whole time, which keeps you feeling in control and not like you're watching a cutscene play out. Plus, the camera never cuts, it just moves slowly from your typical point of view into the dynamic angles used for the counter sequence, then smoothly back into its normal position once it's over. Now, is mashing Y in these parts fundamentally different from mashing triangle in the vast majority of Kingdom Hearts 2's reaction command sequences? No, not really, but they feel different and that's what matters. You also typically don't have to do them to beat the boss, so they actually feel special to hit. Combat as a whole is a lot less methodical than in previous entries and feels a lot more frantic and fast-paced, which I think is a welcome change. Don't get me wrong, older Metroids had a combat style and pace that worked for them, and Dread is just different, not necessarily better. Zero Mission is the 2D Metroid I've spent the most time with, and most of its bosses and mini-bosses are relatively slow-paced. Typically, the boss is the one dictating the pace of the fight. They usually only have one weak spot, and the standard boss fight flowchart is that you spend a few seconds dodging attacks, waiting for the boss to give you an opening, and that's when you can tag them with a couple missile shots. They aren't all like this, but I would say the majority are, and I like this. It allows for a lot of methodical, puzzle-like fights where figuring out the weak point and how to expose it is the focus, and it allows for the more fast-paced fights to feel special. For example, I always loved how in Zero Mission, the Ridley fight is just an all-out brawl. He swoops in and blindsides you, drops the floor out from underneath you, and just starts relentlessly unloading attacks. Throughout the fight, Ridley's entire body is always vulnerable, but he also never stops attacking, so it really feels like a desperate fight for survival instead of a more slow-paced fight like with the robotic version of Ridley. Now, DMC fans, this one's for you, cause I just compared the combat to DMC, and I'm about to do it again. And I know you freaks are all about that shit, so here goes. The boss fights in Metroid Dread remind me of DMC boss fights. There you go, I did it. I'm comparing every game's combat to Devil May Cry now. I'm a card-carrying DMC fan, and part of me just wants to go back to a time before I knew that boss fights could be this good. My favorite aspect of the best Devil May Cry boss fights is that the boss is more or less always vulnerable. You could spend the whole fight dodging, but you won't get anywhere until you get in some offense of your own while evading the boss. You're forced to strike a balance between offense to end the fight and defense to survive the fight, and you have to do both simultaneously because the boss isn't gonna just say, "Oh no, looks like you've dodged enough of my attacks, so I'll just sit here and let you hit my weak point for a while." These great bosses are harder to play against and I'm sure harder to design well, and honestly, Metroid Dread does a pretty fantastic job making these kinds of bosses. Now, something to keep in mind is that both styles of boss fight can be good, and both styles are in most Metroid games, but it feels like the standout fights and the majority of the fights in Dread are more in the Virgil category and not so much in the, Sonic Unleashed category. Honestly, what were they thinking with this block-pushing boss? There's no picking and choosing between dodging the boss and attacking them. You have to do both, and these bosses are relentless. Mostly. Not this one, but he's just a big blob with tentacles. What do you want from him? He doesn't even have a face. Most of the bosses don't have many different attacks either, but the fights are so fast-paced that it hardly matters. Yeah, the big bug thing only has 3 attacks, but he cycles through them so fast that you barely notice, and the fight is still really tense and fun. By far my favorite boss fights are Experiment Z57 and the final boss Ravenbeak. Their attacks are fun to dodge, especially thanks to the Flash Shift. That's actually gotta be the sleeper hit new power-up of the game. Flash Shift makes maneuvering during fights feel so snappy and fun, it's just an awesome addition. They're open to attack during a majority of the fight, though they do go invincible or untargetable at certain points in their fights, but the attacks they do during these segments are unique and fun enough to avoid that I don't really mind. Boss fights also serve as great character moments for Samus, and man, there is so much that could be said for Samus's characterization in this game, and most of it is done completely non-verbally. She has 3 spoken lines in this game, and one of those is a scream, and yet the way she moves communicates so much of her personality. The way she fights exudes confidence and skill, but also shows that she can be pretty brutal. Anyone who remembers Crocomire in Super Metroid already knew that. But she's also never more forceful than absolutely necessary. The way she absorbs E.M.M.I.s powers after defeating one is interesting to me. As a big fan of Doom, I was totally expecting her to just stomp its head in, but instead she just gently places her hand on it. There's just that tiny bit of hesitation right before she puts her hand down, like even she's not sure why she's doing it, or if she even should be doing it. And then she looks at her hand kind of curiously as she absorbs the E.M.M.I.s abilities. It's a subtle touch, but that's what I like about it. It's foreshadowing, but also character building. It's just great animation on Samus all around. The Kraid boss fight is easily the best and most talked about example, but I just have to talk about it. Samus drops into the boss room ready for a fight before we hear a loud roar. We see the unseen boss's POV looking down at Samus, who looks tiny by comparison. She drops her arm cannon down and looks up as if out of fear, until we realize that, well, she's basically just disrespecting Kraid at this point. This is like her third time fighting him, and she is not impressed anymore. It's just a fun moment, and there's a lot of these sprinkled throughout the game. The boss fights in Metroid Dread are fun, fast, and unique. That is, except for 2. Or should I say 8, because 8 of these boss fights are just 4 variations of this guy and 4 separate encounters with Chozo robot soldiers. These fights are fine the first time, hell, they're even fine the second time, but when I'm fighting a series of identical robots with the only variation in the fight being either 1 or 2 robots in either water background or jungle background, I start to get a little bored. You could be pedantic and argue that the robots are just mini-bosses, which, okay, that's true, I guess, but it doesn't really make the fights much more fun, does it? And then there's the question of whether the central units and E.M.M.I.s count as bosses, and maybe they are, and maybe they're just mini-bosses, or not bosses at all, but honestly, I don't know. The point is there's some repeated content here that isn't bad by any means, but it does get a little tiresome when you're on your 4th fight with this guy and his 3 identical brothers. But something that thankfully doesn't get tiresome in Metroid Dread is movement. To me, a game with so much running around is only as good as its movement. If I'm not enjoying the simple act of moving around, then I'm definitely not going to enjoy navigating your massive world. Thankfully, the movement in Dread is buttery smooth. Some of that is down to the refined basic movement. Samus in Zero Mission felt like she weighed 18 tons, jump height was low, and the gravity setting was at least 400 G. In Super Infusion, Samus could jump insanely high from the get-go, and she was floatier than an Osaka Team Kingdom Hearts game. Metroid Dread splits the difference and ends up feeling perfect. Her slide move feels great, and there's a lot of little quality of life improvements with how quickly Samus can transition right into Morph Ball from a slide, or being right next to a low wall with a tunnel in it. Just a lot of little things that make getting around all that smoother. There's more movement power-ups than usual in this one too. Flash Shift I've already talked about, but we've also got Speed Booster, which looks and feels better than ever, and makes for some excellent Shine Spark puzzles. Spider Climb is pretty slow, but once you get the grapple beam, a lot of new possibilities for quick movement open up. You get a double jump, which I think is a first for 2D Metroids at least, and it's a nice little appetizer before getting Space Jump towards the end. I won't go through every power-up in the game, but in general, not a ton has changed from the basic formula of Metroid power-ups. The classic missile and E-tanks are back, not much worth mentioning there, except that missiles and health are incredibly abundant in this game compared to what I'm used to in 2D Metroids. But I think to compensate, enemies do more damage than you'd expect, and they can tank a lot more missile shots than in previous games. I haven't done extensive testing on this front compared to every previous game, but having recently replayed Super and Zero Mission, I definitely felt a difference. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of enemies can take a huge number of missiles to kill, but missile drops give 5 instead of 2, and your max missile capacity is gonna get huge if you're doing any amount of item hunting. Energy drops are buffed in a similar way. A melee counter can drop enough health to refill a majority of your energy in a matter of seconds, but enemies can drain it all again with just a couple of hits. I think this is part of the scrappy combat style they're going for. You lose a lot of resources quickly, but you can regain them back again quickly as well, which definitely contributes to combat's quick pace. Samus feels like an absolute tank in Super Metroid. She can take a lot of hits even from bosses. Enemies will sometimes do as little as 2 damage to you. However, you will eventually get worn down, and when your energy is low, refilling it can take some effort. There aren't a lot of energy stations in Super Metroid, but to compensate, there's a lot of Mario pipes with constantly respawning enemies you can kill over and over for free health. I never really got the point of these. Like, if you're gonna give me an easy way to refill my HP and missiles, then why not just actually give it to me? I don't know what it contributes to the game to make me sit here and kill the same enemy over and over just to heal myself. Regardless, I wouldn't call Dread's energy and missile drops an outright better system. Again, just different and perfectly suited for the combat style they were going for. Now, along with missiles and energy, Aeon is a new resource that, Well, okay, it's actually not new. It's from Metroid 2 Remake, but I gotta be honest, I didn't play that one, and from the sales figures, I'm guessing most of you probably didn't either. I'm just gonna pretend that the new features carried over from Samus Returns are just brand new in Dread, because they might as well be for most people, myself included. E.M.M.I.s is a new resource that recharges itself, so more or less it's a stamina bar for certain abilities, namely the Phantom Cloak, Flash Shift, and Radar. In general, I didn't feel like E.M.M.I.s really did all that much for Metroid Dread. E.M.M.I.s is theoretically a limited resource shared by 3 different abilities, so you need to choose what to use since using one will take away your ability to use the others. But in practice, well, invisibility is only used to hide from E.M.M.I.s, Flash Shift is basically just used during boss fights or to dodge E.M.M.I.s when they've already spotted you, and the Radar is only used when you're item hunting. There's almost no situation in which you'd need to pick which one to use, and since E.M.M.I.s recharges at a different rate depending on what you used it for, functionally each ability just has a set cooldown and that's pretty much it. I repeat, never thought about how much E.M.M.I. I had or when it would recharge, since Flash Shift is the best E.M.M.I. ability, and your E.M.M.I. recharges basically instantly after you Flash Shift. Overall, an addition that's fine, but doesn't really feel impactful. Unfortunately, the music feels much the same. It's not that it's bad, but it's very understated a lot of the time, which is fine and atmospheric, but in pretty much every other Metroid I've played, there's at least a few catchy jams. I could hum a song from just about every Metroid game I've ever played off the top of my head, except for this one. Dread's music feels a little lacking, but the same cannot be said for the sound effects, which are great, and the E.M.M.I. sounds are instantly iconic, and communicate their threat with just a hint of personality. Their beeps and boops sound curious and kind of cute, which makes for a great contrast with their deadly nature. And I'll admit, a lot of my feelings on the music could very easily be my own fault. I spend probably 80% of my time playing Dread with the Switch in handheld mode, which is definitely not the optimal way to experience the music. The music is definitely more focused on atmosphere than on creating catchy melodies. Which is fine, I'm not gonna bash it for having a score that's trying to accomplish something different, but for me, it just didn't end up making that much of an impression. The only part where I really even noticed the music was during a cutscene midway through the game where they played a version of Super Metroid's Brinstar theme. Which brings us to full-on spoiler territory. Skip to this time code if you don't want to hear about the end of the game. So around the midpoint of the game, Exposition the Bird shows up and tells you what the hell has been going on for the first half of the game. Turns out that the name of the Chozo that attacked Samus in the beginning is Ravenbeak, and his tribe of warrior Chozo have been using this smarty Chozo Quiet Robe to control the Metroids and try and conquer the galaxy. Unfortunately, that plan was foiled 20 years ago when Samus wiped out all the Metroids in Metroid 2 Return of Samus. 20 years in our world, not in the Metroid world. And his plans have been further ruined by an X-Parasite outbreak that killed his entire tribe. Oof. This explains why ZDR is still a mostly functional Chozo base and why the grandiose ceremonial halls haven't fallen to ruin like every other Chozo thing we've seen in the series up to this point. This entire planet was an active Chozo facility until not that long ago. In this scene, Samus also speaks for what is, I think, the first time? Well, first time in a good Metroid game anyway? Got him. And she speaks the Chozo language to him, which is really cool. Samus in the games has never really felt connected to her adoptive race except via her suit, but this is a great way to show that she really is a part of this culture. Not long after this, Samus stumbles upon a vault that clearly should not be opened, and surprise, the X-Parasites are back. Now, can I just say that while I love the idea of the X-Parasites, they're very fun and are basically just John Carpenter's The Thing, I just can't really get past their design. They're just too adorable. Like, they're squishy and brightly colored and they make fun little noises. I mean, listen to them. They're making like little baby cooing noises. I guess all this could be similar to the noises E.M.M.I.s make, but I feel like the E.M.M.I. visuals do a better job at selling the threat they pose, and, well, X-Parasites just kinda look like sentient gummies, and come on, you know they must taste good, right? You got your green apple flavor, you got orange flavor, and of course the best one, red flavor. Then again, once they've taken on the form of something else in this game, they're all black and goopy, so maybe I'll pass on eating them. So of course, the X-parasites get loose and the whole planet gets infected. Samus keeps exploring the planets, collects some power-ups, and fights through a few X-parasite bosses until Adam says, "Alright, Samus, your Metroid DNA powers are looking ripe and juicy. Why don't you head on up to Ravenbeak's dining room? I think he's hungry. Time to fulfill your destiny." Fulfill your destiny, huh? That doesn't really sound like something Adam would say. And hey, wait a minute, he hasn't said his little catchphrase since the beginning of the game where he said remote communication would pose a problem. And why does he keep talking about how powerful and handsome Ravenbeak is? Something's up here. Oh my god, it was Ravenbeak all along. So yeah, it turns out Ravenbeak was impersonating Adam all along, using the E.M.M.I.s to try and steal Samus's DNA and guiding Samus to unlock her Metroid powers. She is now a Metroid, and Ravenbeak plans to clone Samus and use an army of Samus Metroids to conquer the galaxy. And after what is maybe the toughest final boss in Metroid history, Samus rages out and unlocks her full Metroid powers, and holy shit. This is one of the coolest power trip victory lap moments I've ever seen in a game. Samus has now awakened her Metroid powers even further to the point they change her suit and increase her powers to insane levels, enough to completely annihilate an X-parasite infused Ravenbeak. What follows is probably the coolest endgame escape sequence in Metroid history, and with a little help from the X-parasite version of Exposition Bird, Samus manages to escape the planet. What a great ending to an honestly fantastic game. The final battle with Ravenbeak is a viciously hard boss, and the genuine triumph I felt at the end made this escape sequence feel even better as a sort of endgame victory lap. This is a Metroid staple, and it's clear why. Action set pieces like this are used sparingly throughout, but that means when they do happen, they're all the more effective. And the story, though kind of bare bones in terms of plot developments, is rich in lore and fan service, and is really just a nice return to form for the Metroid main series. As for what to expect content-wise if you're on the fence about whether you should buy Metroid Dread, my first playthrough took me about 6.5 hours of in-game time, but the in-game timer doesn't count restarts or deaths, so the actual time I spent playing is probably closer to 8 or 9 hours, and getting 100% item completion could easily take twice that or more. Beating the game once will unlock hard mode, and you're gonna need to beat both difficulties in under 4 hours to unlock all of the secret ending rewards in the art gallery. 100% items on any difficulty will also be needed to unlock all of the art in the Chozo archives, which tell the backstory of the Chozo tribe on ZDR. Just these little rewards provide a lot of incentives, so the replay value is surprisingly high. My total playtime at this point is close to 50 hours, and even though I've done literally everything there is to do, I still might go play some more after this review is done. A word of warning though, this game is pretty damn hard. Like, seriously, some of these bosses are brutal. I didn't personally have too much trouble, and I'm the kind of player who likes bashing my head against a hard challenge over and over anyway. But if you aren't super confident in your reflexes and aiming skills, then Dread might prove too difficult for you. Aiming becomes less of an issue when you get the lock on storm missiles, but those are pretty late in the game. You can explore to find more missile and energy tanks to help tank your way through some tough parts, but even collecting items can require some pretty precise maneuvers. It wasn't an issue for me personally, but I think it might be for a lot of people. Despite that, I think it's pretty obvious here that this game is gonna get a solid recommendation from me. In fact, it's pretty solidly my game of the year. I know that doesn't mean a whole lot since this is only my second video in a year, and you guys probably have no idea what I've been playing, but I have played a lot of games this past year, and none of them have come close to Metroid Dread for me. This might even be my new favorite Metroid game, though I'd have to replay Prime to really make sure. This is honestly a new high bar for modern Metroidvanias, and hey, fingers crossed for Metroid Prime 4, right? I am honestly just so happy that Metroid is back, and I really hope that it's here to stay. Anyway, that is gonna be all for this video. I hope you guys liked it. I'm sorry for the long wait. I know it was nearly a year since my last video, but things have been busy, and I'm gonna try to do a lot better this year. If you have any suggestions for games you'd like to see me cover, leave them in the comments. I read every comment that I get. So, thanks so much for watching. Support me on Patreon if you'd like. Thanks to my current patrons, whose names you should be seeing on the screen right now. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks.